The moon had no name. It had a number, KR7, stamped into the Galactic Conclave's survey logs next to a single note that read, "Do not excavate. Do not land. Do not approach." The note had been there for over 14,000 years. Nobody knew who wrote it. Nobody had ever asked. Commander Sethevix read the note, closed the log, and ordered his drill teams to begin work at first light. He was not a reckless creature by nature. He was tall, gray-skinned, with 4 arms and a mind sharp enough to run the Vreth Collective's most profitable excavation fleet. He had cracked open 40 dead worlds in his career. He had pulled rare isotopes from the bellies of frozen moons and sold them for enough credits to buy entire star systems. He was good at his job. He was practical. And practically speaking, a 14,000-year-old warning left by a species that no longer existed was not something worth losing sleep over. The moon KR7 was cold and dark and quiet. Its surface was cracked gray rock, smooth in some places, jagged in others, like old broken teeth. There was no atmosphere worth mentioning, no life, no movement, just frozen silence, and according to the deep scan readouts, an enormous deposit of Varath-9 isotopes sitting about 2 kilometers below the surface, enough to keep the collective wealthy for a generation. The drill teams worked fast. They always did. Vreth workers were efficient and disciplined, and they did not ask questions. They wore thick pressure suits and moved in coordinated lines across the gray rock, setting up drilling rigs and excavation frames with practiced ease. The machines were loud, the ground shook, the frozen moon did not seem to care. Sethevix watched from the command tent, reviewing extraction projections on a glowing screen. The numbers were good. The numbers were very good. He allowed himself a small, satisfied sound, and poured a cup of hot liquid from the dispenser on his desk. It was on the 3rd day that they found the vault. One of the drill heads punched through a layer of rock and hit something that was not rock. The machine screamed and stopped. The crew leader sent a team down on cables to look, and they came back up with wide eyes and quiet voices, saying they had found a wall, a smooth wall, a wall made of something that none of their scanners could read. Sethevix went down himself. He stood at the bottom of the excavation shaft with a hand lamp and stared at the surface in front of him. It was black, not dark gray, not dark brown, but truly, completely black, the kind of black that seemed to swallow the light rather than reflect it. It was smooth as glass. It was enormous. The drill head had only nicked one corner of it. As far as the ground-penetrating sensors could tell, the structure extended for nearly 300 meters in every direction. He put his hand against it. It was cold. It did not vibrate. It did not hum. It felt like touching the absence of something. "What is it made of?" he asked. The chief scanner technician, a small 4-eyed creature named Pelv, shook his head slowly. "We don't know, sir. The scanners can't get through it. No signal comes back. It's like it isn't there, but it clearly is." "Can we cut it?" Pelv looked at the wall, then back at Sethevix. "We have not found an edge yet, sir. We don't know where to cut." They spent the next 2 days mapping the structure. What they found was a sealed vault, rectangular, perfectly constructed, with no visible seams or doors. The alloy it was made from did not exist in any Vreth materials database. It did not exist in the Conclave's shared scientific archive either. It was, as far as anyone could tell, something entirely new, built by hands that had been dust for thousands of years. Eventually, one of the junior engineers found the door. It was not obvious. There was no handle, no panel, no lock that could be seen. But there was a faint outline in the black surface, a rectangle within the rectangle, about 2 meters tall and 1 meter wide, just big enough for a single person to walk through. Sethevix looked at the outline for a long time. He thought about the warning in the survey log. He thought about the 14,000 years this vault had sat under this frozen moon, sealed and silent and untouched. He thought about the fact that whoever had built this thing had clearly wanted it to stay closed. Then he thought about the Varith 9 deposits on the other side, and about the extraction projections, and about how good the numbers had looked. "Open it," he said. It took 6 hours, and 3 different cutting tools, and one very nervous engineering team to create a gap big enough to push a camera through. The camera went in. The feed came back to Sethovix's screen. Inside was a single chamber. The walls were the same black alloy. The floor was flat and clean, as if nothing had ever touched it. The air inside, and there was air inside, somehow still pressurized after all this time, was cold and still. And in the center of the chamber, suspended in a thick transparent gel inside a clear cylindrical pod, was a creature. It was small, smaller than Sethovix had expected. Bipedal, 2 legs, 2 arms, 1 head. Its skin was pale and soft. It had no visible armor, no claws, no scales. Its face was flat and round, with a small nose and a closed mouth, and 2 eyes shut behind thin lids. It looked almost delicate, almost fragile. It looked, frankly, like nothing. Pelv held up his scanner and ran it over the creature through the gap in the wall. The device beeped and processed and was quiet for a moment. Then it chimed, a sharp, urgent sound that Sethovix had never heard it make before, and the screen filled with red text. Pelv read the screen. His 4 eyes went very wide. He read it again. "Sir," he said, very quietly. Sethovix took the scanner from his hands and looked at the screen himself. Species identified, Homo sapiens. Common name, human. Origin 3rd planet, Sol system, Sector 7 null. Biological threat class, extinction level. Advisory, do not revive. Do not engage. Do not interact. Evacuate area immediately. Sethovix stared at the screen for a long time. He looked at the pale, soft, small creature floating in its gel pod. He looked at the screen again. He looked at the creature again. "Extinction level," he said slowly, as if tasting the words. Pelv nodded. His hands were shaking slightly. Sethovix was quiet. Around him, the crew stood still, looking at their commander, waiting. Nobody moved. The cold moon was silent. The vault breathed its ancient, sealed air. Then Sethovix made a sound that, in his species, was the equivalent of a laugh. It was short and dismissive. He handed the scanner back to Pelv and straightened his coat. "Open the pod," he said. "Let's see what all the fuss is about." Nobody in the crew said anything. Nobody argued. Nobody walked away. The revival process took 4 hours. The Vreth medical technician, a thin 6-fingered creature named Osek, had never revived anything from cryosleep before. He had read about it in old conclave medical texts, but the theory was dusty, and the equipment was not designed for a species nobody had ever seen alive. He worked slowly and carefully, checking and rechecking every step, because he had the very strong feeling that making a mistake here would be the last mistake he ever made. The gel drained first. Then the pod temperature rose, degree by degree. Then the machines pushed warm fluid through the creature's veins, and the breathing apparatus filled its lungs with recycled air, over and over, until the lungs began to do it on their own. The whole crew watched through the reinforced viewport that had been cut into the vault wall. Nobody spoke. The medical bay on the ship above them was on standby. 6 armed guards stood inside the chamber at a distance, weapons raised but hands unsteady. Sethovix stood with his arms folded, watching with the calm expression of someone who was not nearly as calm as he appeared. The creature's fingers moved first, just a small twitch. Then the hand closed into a fist and opened again. Then the other hand did the same. Then the eyes opened. They were brown, dark brown, ordinary and quiet, and they moved immediately, not in panic, not in confusion, but with the slow, deliberate focus of something taking stock. The eyes went to the ceiling first, then the walls, then the guards, then Sethevix. They stayed on Sethevix for exactly 3 seconds, before moving on to count the guards again, one by one. Osek activated the translation drone and spoke carefully. "You are safe. You have been in suspension. Do you understand?" The creature, the human, turned its head toward the drone. It blinked once. The voice was low and a little rough from disuse, but steady. "How long?" it said. The drone translated. Osek checked the vault's internal chronometer against the Conclave's standard calendar and swallowed. "Approximately 14,200 years." There was a silence, a long one. The human looked at the ceiling again. Something moved across its face, a brief small thing that Sethevix could not name. Then it was gone. The face became flat and calm again. "Understood," the human said. That was all. Just understood. No screaming, no crying, no confusion. Sethevix had expected all of those things. He had prepared for them. He had not prepared for this. For 2 quiet words and a pair of brown eyes already scanning the room again. "I am Commander Sethevix," he said through the translation drone. "You are aboard the excavation vessel Endless Appetite, currently in orbit above moon KR7. You are not in danger." The human looked at him. "What is your species?" "Vreth." The human nodded once, as if filing the word away. "My name is Dara Voss, Sergeant Major, Earth Combined Forces, 3rd Interstellar Division." A pause. "What is the current political state of the Galactic Conclave?" The question was so calm and so specific that Sethevix blinked all 4 of his eyes at once. "You know of the Conclave?" "We were at war with 3 of its member species," Dara said simply. "Are we still?" Sethevix looked at Osek. Osek looked at the floor. "The war ended," Sethevix said carefully, "long ago." Dara absorbed this. "Who won?" Another silence. Sethevix chose his words slowly. "It was concluded by agreement." The human's eyes were steady. She did not push further. Not yet. Instead, she looked down at her own hands, turned them over once, and then said, "I need food, water, and a full structural diagram of this ship." In that order. One of the guards, a young Vreth named Thok, who had been standing with his weapon raised since the pod opened, slowly lowered it without meaning to. He caught himself and raised it again. But Dara had already noticed. She noticed everything. They brought her food, Vreth ration blocks, which were dense and gray and tasted like salted nothing. She ate all of them without comment, and drank 3 full containers of water and asked for a 4th. Osek monitored her vitals from across the room, and reported quietly to Sethevix that her recovery was, biologically speaking, extraordinary. Her muscle retention after 14,000 years of cryosleep was not just good, it was nearly complete. Her brain activity had normalized within minutes of waking. Her cardiovascular output was already at what the scanner estimated was full operational capacity. "She's healing faster than she should be," Osek murmured. "She's been asleep for 14,000 years, Sethevix replied. "That's my point, sir. She should be weaker. Much weaker." Sethevix said nothing. Dara ate the last ration block and set the wrapper down neatly. "You said my equipment was gone," she said. "Dust," Sethevix confirmed. 14,000 years is a long time." She nodded. "Why did you open the vault?" "Curiosity," Sethevix said. It was at least partially true. Dara looked at him for a long moment. "The warning beacons were functional when I was sealed in. Did you not read them?" "We read them." "But you opened it anyway." Sethevix shifted slightly. "The threat classification seemed unlikely, given your appearance." The human did not react to this the way he expected. She did not seem offended. She did not seem amused. She just looked at him with those steady brown eyes, and said, quietly, That's what the Theresi thought, and the Vorn, and the Cruel Dominion. She paused. You don't know those names, do you? Sethevix shook his head. No, Dara said, you wouldn't. She asked to be moved to a proper room after that. Not a cell. She was clear about the distinction, and something in her voice when she made it convinced even the armed guards to nod along. She was given a small crew quarters near the ship's lower level, with a locked door that she did not try to open. What she did instead was sit on the floor in the center of the room and close her eyes. Thok, watching through the security feed from outside, reported to Sethevix that the human appeared to be sleeping. Osik, reviewing the biometric data, said she was not sleeping. Her heart rate was low but controlled. Her breathing was slow and deliberate. Her eyes moved behind their lids. She was thinking, or counting, or listening. By the end of the first night, she had heard every crew member on the lower deck walk past her door at least twice. She had catalogued the difference in vibration between the ship's main engine and its secondary drive. She had noted which direction the guards rotated, and at what interval. She had counted 14 separate sounds that told her something about the ship's structure, where the walls were thin, where the maintenance corridors ran, where the power lines hummed loudest. She had done all of this quietly, without moving, without making a sound. On the morning of the second day, a young crew member named Sovi brought her breakfast, and made the mistake of asking, politely, why she had been sealed in a vault with an extinction-level warning attached to her species. Then she said, simply and without drama, because the last time someone woke one of us up without being careful about it, the whole situation became very difficult to manage. She picked up the food. Thank you for breakfast. Sovi left the room and stood in the corridor for a full minute before remembering how to walk. Sethevix, watching the feed from his command chair, leaned back slowly. He was beginning to think he had made a mistake, not because the human had done anything threatening, not because she had raised her voice or moved toward anyone, or made a single aggressive gesture, but because she sat in a locked room on a strange ship, 14,000 years from everything she had ever known, surrounded by armed aliens who had ignored every warning ever written about her kind. And she was calm. She was completely, utterly, deeply calm. And that Sethevix was starting to understand was the most dangerous thing in the universe. The message reached Cradle Prime in 6 hours. Cradle Prime was the Conclave's capital station, a massive structure the size of a small moon, housing 4 billion lives across hundreds of species, holding the records and councils and laws that governed most of the known galaxy. It was old and stable and very difficult to rattle. It was rattled now. The message from the Endless Appetite was simple. An excavation team had opened a cryovault on Moon KR-7. Inside was a human. The human was alive and awake and currently sitting in a locked room eating ration blocks. The council chamber of the Elder Assembly went quiet in a way it had not gone quiet in living memory. Elder Vorath, who was 340 years old and had never in his career raised his voice during a session, stood up from his seat and said very clearly, "Seal the classified archives. Get me the Terran war files. All of them. Now." His aide, who had never heard of the Terran War, went to do as told, and came back pale and wide-eyed 20 minutes later, with a data stack so large it required 2 carts to carry. The files were old. Some of them were so old that portions had degraded and could no longer be read. But enough remained. More than enough. The Terran expansion wars had begun roughly 15,000 years ago, before the current conclave structure had fully formed. When humanity, a young spacefaring species from a small blue planet in an unremarkable star system, had begun moving outward into the galaxy. They had not been invited. They had not asked permission. They had simply started exploring, then colonizing, then defending what they had colonized. 3 Conclave member species had decided this was unacceptable. The Tharesi had moved first. They were large, powerful, heavily armored, with a fleet that had never lost a war. They attacked a human colony on a border world and destroyed it completely. They expected the humans to retreat. Instead, humans declared war. The Tharesi had found this funny. The files contained records of the actual communications, the Tharesi commanders sending mocking messages to the human fleet, noting how outnumbered they were, how outgunned, how small and soft and poorly armored. One Tharesi general had written, in a message that later became famous for entirely different reasons, "These creatures have no shell, no venom, no natural weapon of note. This will be brief." It was not brief. The humans did not fight the way the Tharesi expected. They did not meet them in large open fleet battles where numbers and firepower decided everything. They broke apart and came from multiple directions at once. They hit supply lines. They struck bases in the dark, in silence, without warning. They captured Tharesi soldiers and learned from them. Every loss the humans took seemed to teach them something. Every tactic that worked against them once stopped working the second time. And they did not stop. That was the part the Tharesi could not understand. After losses that would have broken any other species, after battles where thousands of their people died, after whole colony fleets were destroyed, the humans kept coming. Not with desperation, not with rage, with patience, with the quiet, grinding determination of something that had decided it was going to outlast whatever was in its way. The Tharesi were gone now. The files did not explain exactly how. Several pages were missing. The Vorn and the Cool Dominion had joined the war later, believing that together they could do what the Tharesi could not. The war lasted 300 years. Hundreds of worlds were touched by it. Entire sectors were reshaped. It ended not because humanity was defeated. It ended because the Conclave, watching from a distance, growing more frightened with each year, made a proposal. A ceasefire. A negotiation. Terms that would give humanity certain recognized territories and rights in exchange for stopping the war. The humans had agreed, quietly, without much fanfare. The Conclave had then spent the next several decades quietly doing something else. Something the official records described carefully and in neutral language as population management. The surviving humans who had been scattered across the galaxy by the war, soldiers, colonists, refugees, were located wherever possible and placed into cryosleep. Not killed. The Conclave had tried killing and found it went very badly for everyone involved. Instead, sealed vaults, frozen sleep, out of sight, out of the fight. And warning beacons on every vault. Warning beacons that someone had ignored. Elder Vorath read the last of the files and sat back in his chair. Around the table, the other council members were quiet. Some were reading. Some were just staring at nothing. "One," said Council Member Drea softly. "There is one awake." "So far," said Vorath. "What does that mean?" "It means," Vorath said slowly, "that we do not know how many vaults were missed. We do not know how many humans were never found. We were thorough, but KR7 was in a region we avoided for geological reasons. There may be others." The chamber was very quiet. "What is it doing?" asked Councilmember Brell. The latest report from the Endless Appetite was read aloud. The human was eating. The human was exercising in her small room, running in circles, doing movements with her body, controlled and repetitive. The human was polite to the crew. She had not tried to escape. She had not threatened anyone. She had asked several questions about the current state of the galaxy, about which species held what territory, about whether Earth still existed, about the Conclave's structure. "She is mapping the situation," Vorak said, "the same way she maps that ship. She is building a picture." "Should we send a retrieval team?" Brell asked. Vorath thought about the Tharesi files, about the pages that were missing, about what kind of event could make official record keepers decide that certain details were better left out of the historical record. No, he said carefully. Not a retrieval team. He paused. Contact Admiral Drax. Tell him to take the 7th Fleet and intercept the Endless Appetite. Quietly. And tell him, Vorath stopped. He looked at the data stack on the table. He looked at all those old, frightened words written by people who had stood where he was standing and made decisions they could not take back. Tell him to be careful, Vorath finished. Tell him to be very, very careful. Meanwhile, on the Endless Appetite, nobody knew any of this yet. Dara was in her room doing push-ups. She had been doing them for 40 minutes, with no sign of stopping. Thok, watching the security feed, had counted 437 and lost track. Osek's biometric readings showed her heart rate elevated but controlled, her breathing steady, her muscles performing at what he kept calling an unreasonable level in his notes. Sethevix came to her door in the early evening and spoke through the comm panel. "You asked earlier about Earth," he said. A pause. The sounds of movement stopped. "Yes." Sethevix hesitated. He was not sure how to say this. He was not sure there was a good way. "Earth is still there," he said. "It's in a protected status under the Conclave. Uninhabited. It has been for a long time." Silence from the other side of the door. "The population?" Dara asked. Sethevix said nothing for a moment. Then, "I'm sorry." Another silence. Longer this time. "Okay," Dara said finally. "Just that. Okay." Sethevix stood outside the door and did not know what to say. He had delivered bad news before. He had told crew members about lost ships, lost colleagues, lost resources. He had never heard anyone receive news like this and respond with a single quiet word that sounded less like grief and more like a person putting something away, carefully, in a box, so they could deal with it later. When Sethevix walked away, Dara sat down on the floor of her room in the dark. She sat there for a long time. Then she stood up, rolled her shoulders back, and started running in circles again. Because she was still here. Because there were still things to figure out. Because 14,000 years of sleep had not changed the one thing that had always been true about her, and every other human being who had ever lived. They kept going. That was what they did. Whatever happened, whatever was lost, whatever was gone, they kept going. Outside the viewport, the stars were cold and distant and very old. The 7th Fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Kessel Reach like a wall of iron. 12 warships, each one the size of a city block. Weapons arrays that could crack open a small moon, which was, given recent events, a darkly appropriate comparison. At the front of the formation flew the flagship Conclave's Will, and aboard it sat Admiral Drax, broad, silver-scaled, decorated with more battle honors than most commanders ever earned in a full career. He had been told to be careful. He had also been told, in quieter language, between the lines of his orders, to make sure that whatever was aboard the Endless Appetite did not leave that ship and did not reach anywhere that mattered. The crew of the excavation vessel were considered a secondary concern. Sethevix received the fleet's communication at 0300 ship time. He read it twice, standing alone in his command room, while the rest of the crew slept. The message was politely worded and completely clear. The Endless Appetite was to hold position, allow a boarding party, and surrender the human for safe transfer and study. Sethevix knew what safe transfer and study meant. He stood there for a long time. He thought about the numbers he had reviewed before landing on KR-7. He thought about how good the extraction projections had looked. He thought about Dara sitting in her room, going quiet when she learned about Earth, and then getting up and running anyway. He went to her door and knocked. She answered immediately. She had not been sleeping. He told her everything. The fleet, the orders, the part about what safe transfer and study really meant. He did not dress it up. She listened without interrupting, standing in the doorway in her patched gray clothes, arms loose at her sides. When he finished, she said, "How long until they're in weapons range?" 7 hours, at current approach speed. She nodded. "Show me the ship schematics. All of them. Engineering, weapons, mining equipment, fuel lines, everything." He showed her. She stood at his desk and studied the diagrams for 11 minutes without speaking. He watched her eyes move across the screens, fast, careful, taking everything in. She asked 4 questions, all of them specific, all of them about things he would not have thought to ask about himself. Then she said, "Wake the crew." "They'll be frightened," Scific said. "Yes," Dara agreed. "That's fine. Frightened people can still follow instructions." The crew assembled in the main bay, 14 workers, 2 technicians, Osek the medic, and Thak the guard, who had at some point in the last 2 days stopped pointing his weapon at Dara and started watching her the way a person watches someone they have decided to trust, even if they are not sure why. They were frightened. Scifics had been right about that. They stood in uneven rows and looked at the small pale human standing at the front of the room, and waited. Dara looked at them for a moment. Then she spoke. She did not give a speech. She did not tell them not to be afraid. She told them exactly what the problem was, exactly what she thought they could do about it, and exactly what she needed each of them to do. She used simple language. She was direct and fast, and she did not waste words. When she said "you" and pointed at someone, they nodded without argument, because there was something in her voice that was not a threat and was not a request. It was a certainty. And certainty is surprisingly easy to follow when the alternative is 12 warships and a fleet admiral. The next 6 hours were the strangest of Scific's long career. The Endless Appetite was a mining vessel. It was not built to fight, but it was built to work in dangerous conditions, and that meant it had tools that, in the right hands, were remarkable. Plasma cutting lines used for slicing rock, industrial-grade magnetic pulse anchors for moving large debris, drill heads the size of a small vehicle, fuel tanks full of a compound that, Dara noted while studying the schematics, became extremely unstable if exposed to a specific electromagnetic frequency. She knew the frequency. The work was quiet and fast, and mostly done in the ship's lower maintenance corridors, where Dara moved through tight spaces without complaint, and directed the crew with short, precise instructions over the comm. Thok stayed close to her, and handed her tools, and at some point realized he had completely forgotten that she was supposed to be the prisoner. Osik kept reporting that her vitals were calm. Her heart rate was elevated, but controlled. She had not eaten since the previous evening, and had not mentioned it. When the fleet entered weapons range, Admiral Drax sent a second message, firmer, less polite. He gave them 1 hour to comply. Dara was in the engine room. She heard the message over the ship's comm. She did not stop what she was doing. "Sir," Thok said carefully, "the fleet is targeting us." "I know," Dara said. "Do you have a plan?" "I have the beginning of one," she said. "That's enough to start." What followed was not a battle in any traditional sense of the word. The Endless Appetite did not have weapons. It could not fight 12 warships. Dara knew this. She had never intended to fight 12 warships. She had intended to make 12 warships fight each other, fight themselves, and fight the environment around them, while the mining vessel moved, changed position, and refused to be where anyone expected it to be. The magnetic pulse anchors fired first, not at the fleet ships, but at 3 large chunks of rocky debris floating in the field around KR-7. The debris moved fast and unpredictably, and forced the outer 2 warships to break formation to avoid collision. The Endless Appetite moved through the gap before it closed. The fuel line discharge came second, released in a wide cloud behind them, invisible against the dark of space, and then triggered by a tight band electromagnetic pulse, from the ship's own sensor array. The resulting explosion was not small. It was not aimed at any ship directly. It was aimed at the space between two ships, and the shockwave hit both of them, hard enough to knock their weapon systems offline, for 4 minutes and 17 seconds. Dara had calculated for 4 minutes. The extra 17 seconds she did not waste. A cutting line, repurposed and attached to a drill head casing loaded with mining explosive, was launched on a tight arc toward the flagship's communication array. The flagship went dark and silent for 6 minutes, while Drax's crew scrambled to restore comms. 6 minutes was a long time. The fleet, without orders from the flagship, without clear visual on the target, and with 2 ships nursing damaged systems, began making decisions independently. Independent decisions from 12 separate commanders are rarely good decisions. They got in each other's way. They fired at debris clouds they mistook for movement. One ship, acting on bad sensor data, locked weapons on another conclave vessel, before someone with a clearer head overrode the targeting system. Sethevix, watching from the command deck, was completely silent for most of this. He had never seen anything like it. Not the explosions or the maneuvering. He had seen those things before in the abstract, in simulations and reports. He had never seen one creature with no weapons of her own, standing in an engine room making quick decisions and pulling a fleet apart at the seams with mining equipment and patience. Dara was bleeding by the end of it. A burst conduit had caught her across the jaw during the second fuel discharge. She had pressed a cloth against it and kept working. The blood dried on her chin, and she did not mention it. When the flagship's comms came back online, Admiral Drax, voice low and tightly controlled, opened a direct channel to the endless appetite. "What are you?" he said. On the command deck, Sethevix relayed the channel to Dara's comm. She was standing in the engine room, tired, jaw cut, hair loose, one hand braced against a warm pipe. She looked like exactly what she was. A single person who had been awake for 2 days, dealing with a situation that would have broken most people before breakfast. She looked into the small camera mounted above the panel in front of her, and she said, "I'm a human, and I'm having a pretty bad day." She paused, and something shifted in her voice. Not louder, not harder, but heavier. "You do not want to see a good one." Drax did not respond for a long moment. Then, he ordered his fleet to hold position. The fleet held position for 2 hours. In those 2 hours, nothing fired. Nobody moved. The 12 warships sat in the cold dark of the Kessel Reach, like animals that had been told to stay, and were not entirely sure why they were obeying, but obeying nonetheless. Aboard the flagship Conclave's Will, Admiral Drax sat in his command chair and reviewed the last 6 hours of sensor data over and over, trying to find the point where things had gone wrong. He kept coming back to the same answer, the moment a single human woke up. 2 of his ships had damaged weapon systems. 1 had nearly fired on another. His communication array had been knocked out by what his engineers confirmed was a repurposed piece of mining equipment. His formation had broken apart twice, and the excavation vessel, an unarmed commercial mining ship with a crew of 14 workers and no military personnel except for 1 woman, was still out there, intact, waiting. He filed a report to Cradle Prime. He tried to be accurate and professional. It was, he reflected, the hardest report he had ever written. On the endless appetite, Dara sat in the medical bay, while Osek cleaned the cut on her jaw and pressed a seal strip over it. She was quiet, which Osek had learned over the last 3 days simply meant she was thinking. He worked carefully and did not make conversation. Thok stood near the door. He was not guarding her. He was not sure what he was doing exactly. Standing near her felt like the right thing to do. Sethevix came in while Osek was finishing. He stood near the door too, and the 4 of them were quiet together for a moment. "They'll send more ships," Sethevix said. "Eventually." "Yes," Dara agreed. So what do we do? She thought for a moment. I need a shuttle and a broadcast channel on a wide frequency. She paused. And someone who can tell me how to get to Cradle Prime. Scifistories looked at her for a long time. You want to go there? Alone? If I run, they'll chase me, Dara said simply. If I hide, they'll search for me, and they'll find the other vaults. She looked at her hands. But if I walk through their front door and talk to them, that changes what I am. I stop being a thing they found. I start being a person they have to deal with. They could kill you, Scifistories said. They could try, she said. It was not arrogance. It was just a fact, delivered in the same tone someone might use to say the sky was dark. She looked up at him. They won't, though, because if they were going to kill me, they'd have done it already. The fact that they're holding position means someone up there is thinking. And thinking people can be talked to. She took the shuttle 4 hours later, alone, broadcasting on every open frequency that she was coming in peace, unarmed, and wished to speak to the Elder Assembly of the Galactic Conclave. She repeated the message every 30 minutes. The signal spread across the reach and out into the larger networks beyond. Communications officers on a dozen different ships picked it up. Journalists on the Conclave's news networks picked it up an hour later. By the time Dara's shuttle had crossed half the distance to Cradle Prime, the message had been heard by roughly 3 billion people across 40 species. The Conclave, facing the choice between intercepting a single unarmed shuttle in full view of the galaxy or simply letting it land, chose to let it land. She was met at the docking bay by 12 armed escorts and one very nervous diplomatic attaché named Sen, who had been given the job of greeting her and who had prepared 17 different opening statements during the flight to the docking bay, and had forgotten all of them the moment the shuttle door opened and she walked out. She was shorter than he had imagined from the reports. She was wearing the same patched gray clothes she had been wearing since she woke up. There was a seal strip on her jaw. She looked tired and calm, and she looked at the 12 armed escorts without any visible concern. "Thank you for meeting me," she said. Sen opened his mouth and closed it, and managed after a moment, "Welcome to Cradle Prime." The walk to the Elder Assembly Chamber took 20 minutes. Dara walked at an even pace in the center of the escort, and observed everything around her with quiet attention. The station was enormous, wide corridors, high ceilings, filled with the movement and noise of 4 billion lives. Hundreds of creatures she had no names for. Architecture built over centuries and layers, old designs mixed with new, the whole thing alive and humming with energy. She filed all of it away. The Elder Assembly was full when she arrived. Every seat was taken. Observers were standing along the walls. The room was big enough to hold several hundred individuals, and it was nearly all the way to capacity. Apparently, word had spread. She stood at the center floor, surrounded by the curved tiers of council seats, and looked up at the faces looking down at her. Elder Vorath sat at the head of the assembly. He was old and gray, and his eyes were measuring, careful. "You asked to speak," he said. His translation drone was very good. His voice came through clearly. "Yes," Dara said. She did not look around nervously. She did not fidget. She stood as if she had stood in front of important gatherings many times before, which she had, though none of them had been quite like this. "I want to say 3 things. I'll be brief." Vorath gestured for her to continue. "First," Dara said, "I know the vaults are still out there. I know there are more humans in cryosleep, on moons and dead worlds across this galaxy. I don't know how many. You probably don't know exactly either. But they're there." She paused. "I can't promise to keep that quiet. And I can't stop someone else from stumbling across one the same way your excavation team stumbled across mine." The chamber was silent. "Second," she said, "I am not here to restart a war. Humanity was never interested in war. We were interested in being left alone and being able to defend ourselves when we weren't. Those are not the same thing. Everything that happened 15,000 years ago could have been avoided if the first 3 species that attacked us had simply left our colonies alone. She let that sit for a moment. I am not carrying a grudge. I don't have the energy for it. But I want to be honest about how we got here. Vorath said nothing. Several council members were very still. Third, Dara said, I want to make a simple arrangement. You leave the vaults alone. If you find one, you contact me and I will handle it. Any human that wakes up, I will speak to first and help them understand the current situation. In return, we will not be a problem. We will not expand without agreement. We will not act against the Conclave. She looked up at Vorath steadily. You had 300 years of war with us. You also had 15,000 years of peace, because when we agreed to something, we held to it. I am offering you more of the second thing. The assembly deliberated for 6 hours. Dara sat in a waiting room with Sen, who brought her food 3 times, and eventually forgot to be nervous around her, and started asking her careful questions about what Earth had been like. She answered honestly. He listened with the focused attention of someone storing things up to think about later. When the assembly called her back, Vorath spoke for the council. The answer was yes. There were conditions and subconditions, and a long list of agreed terms that would be drafted into a formal document over the following weeks. But the core of it was yes. The arrangement she had described was acceptable. A contact channel would be established. The vaults would be registered and protected, not destroyed or opened without her involvement. She was given temporary recognized status as a Conclave independent representative, which was a category that had technically existed for centuries, but had never actually been used. She signed the preliminary agreement with a stylus that Sen produced from his coat pocket, and then she walked out of the Elder Assembly Chamber and through the corridors of Cradle Prime, and out to the wide upper terrace that overlooked the station's central atrium. A vast open space filled with light and noise and the movement of countless lives. A young Vreth journalist found her there. She had a recorder and an expression that suggested she had run a considerable distance to get there before anyone else. Sergeant Major Voss, she said, breathlessly, do you think humans and the Conclave can ever truly become one community? Work together? Trust each other? Dara looked out over the atrium. She thought about the cryovaults on dark moons. She thought about the names the Conclave did not know anymore. The Theresi, the Vorn, the Cool Dominion, names that had become lessons instead of neighbors. She thought about Sethovix opening a vault he had been warned to leave alone, and Thok slowly lowering a weapon he never needed to raise, and Sen asking careful questions about a world he would never see. She thought about 14,000 years of silence and one ordinary morning that had decided to be different. Maybe, she said, we're patient. A small, quiet curve at the corner of her mouth. You'd be surprised what we're willing to wait for. That evening, without ceremony or announcement, the Conclave's Navigation Authority updated the beacon codes on every registered cryovault in the galaxy. The old message was removed. The new message was shorter, and nobody argued about the wording, because everyone who had been in that assembly room agreed it was accurate. The new message said, Cryovault, protected site, human occupant inside, approach with respect, they remember everything.